That night, she threw the crystal glass half an inch past my cheek. It was not an accident. It was a lesson in power. 2 weeks later, the woman who called me the Stray knelt on the floor of my $950 a month studio, offering 8 figures for a signature. I said nothing. I opened my laptop and played the 41-minute video she never knew existed. The room went silent. My name is Harper Thomas. The crystal on the Upper East Side dining table was so bright it hurt to look at. It was a forest of fragile stems, reflecting the chandelier light into 1,000 sharp pinpricks. The silverware was worse. Each fork, each knife, was aligned with the precision of a military parade, a perfect yard line on the starched white linen. This was not a meal. It was a performance of order, and I was the one element out of place. I sat at the far end, as always. My seat was a deliberate geographical statement, placed just outside the warm, golden pool of the main chandelier. For 27 years, since I arrived at age 6, this had been my spot, the shadow zone. At the head of the table, Marjorie Hallworth Dean, the matriarch, raised her glass. The diamond on her hand, a stone known as the Dean Ice, caught the light and threw a cold spark across the room. She was a woman sculpted from expensive ice, all sharp angles and flawless preservation. "A toast," she announced. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the low murmur of conversation like a scalpel. The room went silent. Spoons paused halfway to mouths. "To family," she said, her eyes sweeping the table before landing, precisely, on me. "And to the necessary, if sometimes unpleasant, pruning of the family tree." A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. As you all know, with Edmund's passing, we enter a new era, an era of clarity. I have always believed that kindness, like any resource, must be managed. It cannot be infinite. She took a delicate sip of water. "As of this evening, the family's formal obligations of kindness are concluded." It was a bloodbath delivered in a boardroom monotone. She was cutting me off, right there, between the soup and the fish. My name, Harper Thomas, the name I had kept. A small, stubborn anchor to a life before them was being officially severed from the Dean legacy. Beside her, her daughter, my stepsister Savannah Dean, laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, as practiced as her tennis backhand. She leaned forward, her blonde hair falling in a perfect, calculated sheet. "Don't look so glum, Harper," she purred, loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's just logistics. Some people are born to be at the party. Others," she flicked a perfectly manicured nail in my direction, "are born to serve the kitchen." I did not move. I did not speak. I am 33 years old. I run my own business. And in this room, I was 6 again. The girl they rescued, the stray they clothed in cashmere and reminded daily of the debt. I focused on the heavy silver fork in my hand. I counted my breaths. 1, the air felt thin. 2, do not let your hand shake. 3, do not give them the satisfaction. The polite, orchestrated laughter of the extended family rose around the table. My uncle, a man whose entire career was a sinecure at the family's philanthropic arm, raised his glass. "To clarity," he echoed, his eyes avoiding mine. The conversation resumed. Artificially bright, they turned to me, a perfunctory gesture. "And you?" "Harper," Marjorie's cousin asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "How is your little project, your drawing on the computer?" My little project was Thomas Company, a user experience design studio I had built from nothing. We had 2 full-time employees and a roster of clients who actually valued our work. "It's going well, thank you," I said. My voice was level, a minor miracle. "We just landed a contract for a new fintech platform." "How lovely," Savannah said, her smile wide and vacant. "Painting by numbers. How quaint." The laughter was louder this time. I was the court jester, the amusing diversion before the main course. At the far end of the table, the head, one chair remained empty. Edmund Dean, my adoptive grandfather, the only one who had ever seen me. His absence was a physical presence, a vast, silent void that filled the room more completely than any of the living guests. He had been dead for 6 weeks, and with him, my only shield was gone. Marjorie had wasted no time. I already knew what was coming. The email had arrived that morning, not from Marjorie herself, but from her executive assistant. The subject line was Stark Re-Estate of Edmund Dean. The body was a single sentence: Mrs. Dean wishes to inform you that your presence is not required at the formal reading of the will. They were not just cutting me off, they were erasing me. My hand drifted to the napkin in my lap. My fingers brushed against something stiff, hidden in the folds. It was not part of the table setting, it was sharp-cornered. Keeping my hand below the table, I drew it out. A business card, cream-colored, heavy stock, embossed, Arthur Pike, Escaux, Dean Family Council. I stared at it. Arthur Pike. He was Edmund's man, not Marjorie's. How had this gotten here? A waiter, a sympathizer in the house, I slipped it into my pocket. The sharp corner digging into my palm. The dinner dragged on. Dessert was served. A complex architectural structure of chocolate and spun sugar. I ate nothing. I waited. Finally, Marjorie signaled the end. A wonderful evening. I stood. The scraping of my chair leg on the parquet floor was obscenely loud in the sudden quiet. As all eyes turned to me, I placed my napkin on the table. "Thank you for the meal, Marjorie," I said. She was already looking past me, toward her true daughter, but she paused, turning her head just enough to fix me with that icy stare. "And Harper," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, a final, intimate execution. "Stop using the Dean name. It no longer applies." For a second, the air left my lungs, the name I had never fully used, but had always held in reserve, a complicated, heavy inheritance. She was taking even that. I looked down at my hand. On my right ring finger was a heavy, old-fashioned gold signet ring, the Dean crest. It was their 18th birthday gift to me, a gesture of inclusion that had always felt like a brand. Slowly, I pulled it off. My finger felt light, naked. I walked the length of the table, past the averted eyes of cousins and uncles, past Savannah's triumphant smirk. I stopped at Marjorie's right hand, where a small, antique silver tray sat, gleaming, for discarded spoons. I did not throw the ring. I did not drop it. I placed it, very deliberately, in the center of the tray. The sound of the gold hitting the silver was small, but sharp, a single, clear clack. It was the sound of a lock engaging, the sound of a door closing, the sound of a full stop. I turned and walked out of the dining room without looking back. The elevator ride down from the penthouse was silent. The walls were mirrored, and I watched the reflection of a woman standing unnaturally still. She was no longer shrinking. She was compressing, like steel. I looked at my own eyes in the glass. Today they put me in the dark corner. I promised my reflection, one day, I will light up the whole house. The heavy doors opened to the lobby. As I stepped onto the marble, my coat pocket vibrated. I pulled out my phone. A text from an unknown number. "See me at 10 a.m. tomorrow. AP. Arthur Pike." I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. The cold Manhattan air hit me like a slap, shocking my lungs. It was sharp and raw, and it smelled of metal, exhaust, and, from a vendor's cart on the corner, the sudden, bright scent of orange peels. It smelled, for the first time in my life, like freedom. I looked up. Across the street, a massive billboard was plastered against the side of a building, illuminated against the dark sky. It was for the family's flagship charity, the Northbridge Promise Fund. It featured a stylized photo of Marjorie and Savannah, smiling benevolently. The tagline loomed over the city, "A New Era." Arthur Pike's office was a museum of walnut and old money. It occupied the kind of midtown building that announced its permanence in limestone and brass. The air inside smelled of floor wax, old leather, and the faint, sharp tang of ozone from the high-capacity scanners humming quietly in the corner. I arrived at exactly 10 a.m. A silent assistant took my coat and led me into the main office. there were no family portraits, only shelves of leather-bound legal volumes, a formidable antique safe, and jarringly modern, a wide-angle security camera mounted discreetly in the corner, its tiny green light active. Arthur Pike rose from his desk. He was a tall, thin man in a perfectly tailored suit, his face a map of disciplined neutrality. He had been Edmund's lawyer for 40 years, a position that made him an anomaly, a man Marjorie could not fire. "Miss Thomas," he said, not smiling. He did not gesture to the plush visitor chairs. Instead, he directed me to a heavy conference table. "Please." On the table, several items were arranged with the same precision as the silverware the night before: a thick, vellum-bound document, a laptop, a small, sealed archival box. "I will be direct," Arthur began, his voice dry as paper. "We have very little time, and a great deal of legal ground to cover. What you were shown last night was a performance. What you are about to see is the reality." He opened the bound document. "This is the final, executed last will and testament of Edmund Dean, dated 18 months ago." He turned to the laptop and opened a file. A video player appeared. "This will is robustly verified. It was signed in this office, in the presence of myself and 2 independent witnesses, associates from our neighboring firms. It was signed in wet ink." He tapped the document. "And it was signed digitally, with a biometric thumbprint scan." He pressed play. Edmund appeared on the screen. My stomach tightened instantly. He looked healthy. He was not the frail man from the last few months. He was in his study, wearing his favorite tweed jacket, and his eyes were sharp. He looked directly into the camera, as if looking at me. "This is Edmund Dean," he stated, his voice firm. "It is March 4th. I am of sound mind and body, and this recording, along with the accompanying physical document, represents my final and absolute will." He proceeded to outline the disposition of his personal effects, minor properties. It was straightforward. Then he paused. "Regarding the Northbridge Promise Fund," Edmund said, his gaze seeming to intensify, "I have concerns. A philanthropic entity is only as strong as its integrity. It must not become a vehicle for ego." My breath caught. "Therefore," Edmund continued, "I have established a specific provision, a failsafe." Arthur Pike paused the video. He opened the archival box and removed a single, laminated page. It was an addendum, attached to the main will with a wax seal and a complex, notarized staple. He slid it across the table to me. I read the legal language, but one section was highlighted. "The Golden Clause," Arthur said quietly, as Edmund called it. I read the words: "In the event the primary named beneficiary of the Northbridge Promise Fund, Harper Thomas, has attained the age of 30 years upon my passing, all subsequent amendments, codicils, or restructuring efforts pertaining to the fund, made after the execution date of this document, shall be rendered null and void unless accompanied by the explicit, written, and notarized consent of said beneficiary." I read it again, and a third time. "I am 33, I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You are 33, Arthur confirmed, his face impassive. Marjorie, it seems, overlooked that detail. Or rather, she never knew the clause existed. Edmund and I structured this quietly. She assumed your inheritance, if any, would be symbolic. She did not know that Edmund's last act was to make it ironclad." He let the silence sit for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle. The sounds of the city outside, the distant sirens, the hum of traffic, seemed to fade. "Marjorie," Arthur continued, picking up a different, thinner folder, "has been very busy since Edmund's passing. She has filed a restructured charter for the fund. She has appointed Savannah to the board. She has initiated a new wave of transparent accounting." He opened the folder. Inside were copies of notarized documents, bank transfers. "Unfortunately for her," Arthur said. "She filed them after Edmund's death, making them, according to the document you just read, null and void." "She will fight it," I said, my mind racing. She will say he was not of sound mind. She will say I influenced him. She will try, Arthur agreed. Which brings us to the second matter. Her restructuring appears to have involved some irregularities. He pointed to a copy of a notary's stamp on one of Marjorie's new filings. This is from a public notary in Queens. We ran a check. The fee was paid via an unusual wire transfer, not a standard check. More interesting, he slid another paper forward, is the metadata. My focus sharpened. This was my language. I design systems. I understand data trails. Marjorie's team filed these documents digitally with the state, Arthur said. According to the metadata on the PDF she submitted, the file was created at 3:05 p.m. on October 10th, but the digital signature from the notary. It was time-stamped at 3:02 p.m. Before the document technically existed, he tapped the screen. A small error, but in a court, there is no such thing as a small error. There is only integrity, or the lack of it. My mind flashed back to last night. Some are born to serve the kitchen. Stop using the Dean name. They were not just dismissing me. They were actively defrauding my inheritance while I sat at their table. The internal accounting, Arthur said, his voice dropping lower, tells a different story from her public declarations of transparency. We have a concerned party, shall we say, within the organization, who has maintained mirrored records. He slid a final document across the table. It was a simple spreadsheet, but it was devastating. Lines and lines of expenditures, community works, vendor payments, consulting fees. What am I looking at? You are looking, Arthur said, at the primary beneficiary of the Northbridge Promise Fund. You, Harper Thomas, are the sole controlling heir of the fund and its assets. He let that land. The fund's current valuation, which Marjorie has been desperately trying to consolidate under her new charter, is $52 million. The room tilted. $52 million. I thought of my $950 a month studio. I thought of the client I was chasing last week. They thought it was symbolic, Arthur repeated, almost to himself. They thought he would leave you a painting, perhaps a trust for your little drawings. They never knew he was giving you the keys. He was giving you the entire house. What? What do I do? You do nothing, Arthur said. Not yet. Not publicly. He pointed to a glossy invitation on his desk. In 3 days, Marjorie is hosting the annual Northbridge Gala at the Lenox Imperial. The mayor will be there. The press will be there. She intends to announce her new era of philanthropy. She will be presenting her new, transparent structure. She will be presenting a fraud, I said. Precisely. And you, Arthur said, will let her. You will not confront her tonight. You will not send a cease and desist. You will let her walk onto that stage and expose herself completely to her most important audience. He picked up a small black USB drive and held it between 2 fingers. This is a copy of Edmund's video. Your copy. He handed it to me. It was warm from his hand. He left a note for you, too. Arthur opened a drawer and produced a simple, cream-colored envelope. My name was on it, in Edmund's familiar, architectural handwriting. I opened it. The note was short. Harper, I hoped it would not come to this, but I always taught you to build things that last. Integrity is the only material that does. Do not let them tarnish it. It's time. I closed my eyes. It's time. We have a 2-tiered plan, Arthur said. All business again. First, the legal front. Second, the media front. Both will be executed without a single step over the line of the law. We will be more transparent than she ever pretended to be. He was already typing an email. The first step is quiet. We are sending a formal Notice of Beneficiary Verification to the custodial bank that holds the fund's assets. We are not filing an injunction. We are not alleging fraud. We are simply providing the bank with the correct, superseding legal document, as per standard procedure. What will that do? It will freeze everything, Arthur said, quietly. No transaction that Marjorie or Savannah attempts to make will go through. When they call the bank, They will be told the account is under a routine verification hold. They will panic, and they will not know who to blame. I stood up, my legs feeling steadier than they had a moment ago. I slipped the USB and Edmund's note into my pocket. "One more thing," I said, remembering. I checked my spam folder this morning, a habit. I pulled out my phone and showed him an email that had been routed to junk. It was dated the day before Edmund died. The sender was an encrypted address I did not recognize. The subject was blank. The body of the email contained only one sentence. "Truth doesn't ask permission." Arthur Pike looked at the email, and for the first time, the barest hint of a smile touched his lips. "It appears," he said, "that we are not the only ones who kept good records." I left his office at 11:30 a.m. I walked out into the sharp November air. The city looked exactly the same taxis, the same noise, the same crowds. But the soundtrack in my head had changed. The vague, anxious static was gone. It was replaced by a low, steady drumbeat, a rhythm, a purpose. As I reached the corner, my phone began to vibrate, a number I did not recognize. I ignored it. It rang again, a different number, but the same exchange. I let it ring until the call went to voicemail. It vibrated again immediately. Marjorie, Savannah, their assistants, their lawyers. The bank had received Arthur's email. I put the phone on silent and slipped it back into my pocket. They were in the dark. I was in the light, and I let the phone vibrate. Unanswered, all the way to the subway. The first call I made was not to a lawyer, but to my studio. I told my team I was taking a personal week. Then, I went to work. My investigation did not begin in a dark alley. It began in a bright, overpriced coffee shop in Midtown, the kind favored by women who wear expensive athleisure to lunch. I sat in a corner with my laptop, nursing a $6 latte, and listened. 2 tables over, 2 women, friends of Savannah's from the charity circuit, were dissecting the upcoming gala. Their voices were high and confident, carrying easily over the hiss of the espresso machine. "Marjorie is a genius, really," the one with the large Cartier bracelet said. "She managed to fold the entire Community Works renovation budget into the new operating costs. The invoices must be staggering," said the other, stirring her tea. "I heard the contractor they're using is specialized, very discreet." "Shadow contracting, darling," Cartier replied, lowering her voice just a fraction, a conspiratorial lean-in. "You find a shell company, preferably one based in Delaware. You inflate the pricing by 40%, and the shell company consults with the primary vendor. The fund pays the inflated price, the vendor kicks back the difference, and everyone is happy. It's just smart accounting," I typed, my fingers steady on the keyboard. Shell companies, shadow contractors, inflated pricing. I did not need to embellish. They were handing me the vocabulary of the crime. I left the cafe and went back to my apartment, not to the Dean townhouse. My small studio became my war room. Arthur had provided me with a secure link to the mirrored drive, the one maintained by the concerned party inside the fund. First, I analyzed the public-facing assets. The new Northbridge Promise Fund website, the one Marjorie had commissioned, was beautiful. It was all soft-focus videos, empathetic typography, and glowing testimonials. It was also, from a design perspective, a tank. It was heavy, slow, and built by a very, very expensive agency. I dug into the code. I found the developer's commit history on a public repository they had carelessly left unsecured. I could see the timeline of the redesign. The first commits were made exactly 3 days after Edmund's death. The primary administrator account that pushed the final changes was Steen Admin, Savannah. The donation portal was slick, but the efficiency data was buried. When I found it, the donation-to-program ratio had plummeted. The overhead, previously managed by Edmund at a lean 8%, had skyrocketed to 34%, all under the banner of New Era Transparency. Then, I opened the internal drive. It was a perfect mirror of the public drive, with one exception, one hidden folder. Inside that folder was a single Excel file, last modified 2 days ago. The file was named CW Internal Audit Q4. Community Works. I opened it. It was not a little drawing. It was a ledger, page after page of wire transfers, vendor codes, and line items. It was the $28.7 million Arthur had mentioned. The line items were brazenly vague. Logistics services, 1.2 Ms. Site preparation, 2.5 Ms. Educational consulting phase 1, 3 Ms. The money was moving in a circle. It was being wired from the fund to a series of 14 different LLCs. Those LLCs, in turn, were paying consulting fees back to a single holding company. The holding company's registration address was a mailbox service in Wilmington, Delaware. This was my turf. User experience is not just about fonts and buttons. It is about information architecture. It is about finding a clear path through chaos. I spent the next 6 hours doing exactly what I do for my clients. I built a dashboard. I created a visual, side-by-side comparison. On the left, the public-facing website, with its promises of new libraries and computer labs. On the right, the Community Works ledger, showing the money flowing not to schools, but to shell companies. I visualized the $28.7 million discrepancy. I made it clean. I made it simple. I made it impossible to ignore. The next morning, Arthur had arranged a meeting, not with the police, but with a different kind of authority. Naomi Rusk was a senior financial investigator for a joint DOJ-IRS task force. We met in a sterile, anonymous lobby of a corporate services building downtown. She wore a practical gray suit, no jewelry, and had the most observant, unsettlingly patient eyes I had ever seen. I did not grandstand. I did not appeal to emotion. I opened my laptop. "I am Harper Thomas," I said. "By the terms of my grandfather's will, I am the legal controlling trustee of the Northbridge Promise Fund. I am in the process of conducting a full internal audit. This is what I have found so far." I turned the laptop around. I showed her the dashboard. She watched, silent, as I clicked through the data. I showed her the public site, then the internal ledger. I showed her the wire transfers. I showed her the list of LLCs. She watched the entire presentation, which took exactly 15 minutes, without a single interruption. When I was finished, she finally spoke. "This is very clean, Miss Thomas. I am providing this to you as the legal owner of the data," I said, repeating the words Arthur had drilled into me. "This is my property, which I am turning over to you. I am not a whistleblower. I am the victim of what appears to be significant financial mismanagement." Naomi nodded slowly. "We appreciate the distinction. We cannot act on suspicion. We cannot move on family squabbles. But we can move on clean, legally sourced data." She looked at the screen again. "This," she tapped my dashboard, "is probable cause. We needed a legal source. You just gave it to us, and we appreciate your patience." "What does patience mean?" "It means we will get the warrants for the rest," Naomi said. "We will subpoena the banks. We will trace the Delaware holding company. You provided the map. We will follow it. You just keep doing what you're doing. Let them think they are in control. We will handle the rest." I handed her a sealed USB drive containing my dashboard and the raw files from the internal ledger. "You have my number," she said. "Do not call it unless the building is on fire." I left the meeting and felt the ground shift. This was no longer just about me. It was about a federal case. I was halfway back to my apartment when my phone buzzed. It was not a call. It was a push notification from the custodial bank, the one Arthur had contacted. I had set up an alert on the fund's main account. Notification: a temporary administrative freeze has been placed on account ending 4402, pending legal verification of trusteeship. All outgoing transactions are suspended. Arthur's quiet move had landed. The vault was locked. Less than 60 seconds later, my phone rang. The screen flashed, "Marjorie Dean." I let it ring. It stopped. It rang again. Immediately, I let it ring. A text message appeared. "Family meeting, my apartment, 8 p.m. tonight. Do not be late. It was not a request. It was a summons. It was the voice of a queen who had just found the castle gates locked from the inside. She did not know why, but she knew who to blame. I spent the afternoon preparing. I went to a stationery store and bought a single, thick, blank white card and a matching envelope. I had a specific moment in mind for it. At 7:30 p.m., I stood in my small apartment. I picked up my audio recorder. It was a simple, high-fidelity device, shaped exactly like an expensive fountain pen. I checked the state law again. New York, one-party consent. I was the one party. I had no intention of hiding it. It was not a weapon. It was a reminder. I arrived at the Upper East Side building at 7:55 p.m. The doorman, a man who had known me for 27 years, suddenly did not recognize me. "I'm sorry, miss, I need to call up for Harper Thomas," I said. "She's expecting me." He picked up the phone, his face a mask of professional discomfort. "Mrs. Dean, a Miss Harper Thomas is—" He listened. "Yes, ma'am." He hung up and pointedly did not look at me. "Go on up." As I stepped into the elevator, my phone vibrated. A text from Arthur. "Security just flagged your entry. They are nervous. Remember, you are the legal trustee. You are not a guest. Go in." The elevator doors opened onto the penthouse foyer. It was dead silent, but I could hear it. The sound of expensive fabric moving against itself. The sound of haute couture rustling. It was a sound like dry leaves, or waves pulling back over sand. Marjorie and Savannah were waiting in the main drawing room. They were standing, not sitting, posed, like a portrait of indignation. I walked into the room. I walked past the low-slung sofa, past the glass coffee table, and past the far-end chair where I had eaten my last meal here. I walked to the center of the room, to the heavy mahogany partner's desk that Marjorie used as her throne. I sat down in the large leather chair directly opposite her. I took the pen recorder from my jacket pocket and placed it on the desk, centered perfectly on the leather blotter, halfway between her and me. "You called a meeting," I said. The pen recorder sat on the desk, a black, silent witness. Marjorie did not look at it. She did not acknowledge it. She looked only at me. Her eyes 2 chips of blue ice. Savannah, however, could not stop looking at it. Her gaze flickered from the recorder to my face, her agitation a visible shimmer in the air. Marjorie picked up a heavy crystal glass, the same kind she had thrown near me weeks ago, filled with water. She raised it, not in a toast, but as a gavel. "We will speak as adults now. Harper," she said. Her voice was calm, the voice of a surgeon about to perform a necessary, albeit unpleasant, amputation. Savannah stepped forward. She was holding a dark navy blue leather portfolio. She placed it on the desk with a heavy, definitive thud. It slid across the polished wood and stopped just inches from my hand. "This is a generous offer," Savannah said, her voice tight with a poorly concealed fury. "You will voluntarily renounce any and all claims to the fund, citing personal reasons and emotional distress." I did not move. "It includes a non-disclosure agreement," Savannah continued, tapping the leather cover. "A permanent one. You will not speak of the Dean family, the fund, or this meeting, to anyone, ever. In exchange, Marjorie is prepared to offer you a one-time settlement, enough to continue your little projects." "Sign it," Marjorie commanded. It was not a request. I opened the portfolio. The paper was thick, creamy, expensive. The legal language was dense, crafted by lawyers who charged thousands per hour. I am not a lawyer, but I am a designer. I understand structure. And this structure was a cage. I read every line. My eyes scanned the text. Hereafter relinquishes, waives, and forever discharges any and all claims. In perpetuity, across all known and unknown universes. Acknowledges the validity of the restructured charter. Agrees to penalties for breach, including immediate clawback and punitive damages, calculated at the sole discretion of the board. It was not an agreement. It was an annihilation. It was a legal document written to erase me from history, to make me retroactively agree that I had never existed, that Edmund's will was a fantasy. It was poison, bound in leather. I turned the page, and then I saw the addendum. Furthermore, I read aloud, my voice sounding foreign in the quiet room. The undersigned, Harper Thomas, admits to the unauthorized use and replication of proprietary design assets belonging to the Northbridge Promise Fund, and agrees to transfer all intellectual property of Thomas Comte to the fund as compensatory damages. I stopped. I looked up. Savannah was smiling. It was a thin, vicious smile. "Your little drawings," she said, "the ones you did for the community center website before the redesign, our lawyers found them. They are technically the property of the fund. Copyright theft is a very, very serious charge. Harper, it could ruin your business overnight. This was their leverage. This was the knife they thought they had at my throat." I felt a strange, cold calm settle over me. I thought of the late nights, the wireframes, the user testing sessions. I thought of the email I had sent to Edmund's assistant 2 years ago. "I never billed the fund for that work," I said quietly. "Exactly," Savannah pounced. "Unpaid work, meaning it belongs to the employer." "I billed the fund exactly $1, I corrected her. "And I sent a pro bono license agreement to Edmund's office for the use of the assets, which he signed. I retain all underlying intellectual property. It is in my files. I assume it is also in Arthur Pike's." Savannah's smile froze. The color drained from her face. She looked at Marjorie. Marjorie waved a dismissive hand, annoyed by the failure of her daughter's tactic. "This is irrelevant," she snapped. "This is not a negotiation. It is a finality. Change your name, legally, erase any connection, take the money, and disappear." She pushed a pen across the desk. It was not my pen recorder. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy, black, gold-nibbed, the official instrument of their world. The pen used to sign treaties, to close deals, to cut people out. I looked at the pen. I looked at the final signature page of the NDA. The silence in the room stretched. It became heavy, suffocating. The only sound was the faint tick of the huge regulator clock against the far wall. Tick, tick, tick. Marjorie leaned forward. Her eyes narrowed. "Sign it, girl. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." I reached out my hand. Savannah let out a small, sharp sigh of relief. I did not pick up the Mont Blanc. I placed my hand on my pen, the recorder. I pushed the stop button. A tiny red light blinked once and went dark. Then, very deliberately, I placed my pen back in my inside jacket pocket. "No," I said. Marjorie stared at me. It was a look of pure, uncomprehending shock. It was the look of a person who had pushed a button and the world failed to obey. "What did you say?" "No, I will not be signing this. I will not be changing my name, and I will not be taking your settlement." Savannah found her voice first, high and shrill. "You ungrateful little, after everything we—" "And I will not," I continued, my voice cutting cleanly over hers, "be negotiating the terms of my own inheritance." I stood up. The leather chair sighed behind me. "You are making the biggest mistake of your life," Marjorie said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "You will leave this room with nothing. You will be barred. You will be a pariah." "I'm afraid you are mistaken," I said. As I spoke, I saw a flash of movement reflected in the dark glass of the window. A man in the lobby of the building, briefly visible as the elevator doors opened and closed. He was holding a familiar briefcase. Arthur. He had been in the building the whole time. Waiting, I looked back at Marjorie. "I will see you at the gala." Savannah let out a sharp, ugly laugh. "The gala. Are you insane? You are not on any list. You will not get within 100 feet of the door. Security will remove you." I smiled. It was a small smile, and it felt new on my face. It was cold. "That is the difference between you and me, Savannah," I said. "You need an invitation to get in. I do not need an invitation to my own event." I turned to the desk. I pulled the blank white card and envelope I had bought earlier from my pocket. I took a simple pen my own, not theirs, from my bag. Marjorie and Savannah watched me, frozen, as if I were a strange animal they did not know how to handle. I wrote 5 words on the card. I sealed it in the envelope. I did not write a name on the front. I placed it on top of their rejected NDA. "What is this?" Marjorie demanded. "A courtesy," I said. "A reminder." I walked out of the room. I did not run. I walked, my heels clicking on the parquet floor. I did not look back. I stepped into the private elevator. The heavy bronze doors slid shut, sealing me in. The mirrors on every wall reflected me, 1,000 times. I looked at the woman in the glass. Her shoulders were back. Her chin was up. She was not the girl who had shrunk at the dinner table. She was not the child they had hidden in the shadows. She looked, for the first time in my memory, completely solid. The elevator began its silent, smooth descent. I will light up the whole house. The doors opened to the lobby. Arthur was gone, as I knew he would be. I pushed through the main doors, back into the cold night air. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out. A new text message. Encrypted. It was from Naomi Rusk. "Warrants are signed. Full approval. They are moving on the bank records and the Delaware Holding Company now. Stick to the gala timeline. It is all admissible. Good work." I took a deep breath. The cold air burned. I hailed a cab. The yellow light a beacon in the dark. I got back to my apartment. The small, quiet space felt like a fortress. I turned on every light. I sat at my desk and opened a new file on my laptop. I typed "Our Gala Prep." I started a list. 1. Secure high-lumen projector. 2. Finalize and verify dashboard data. 3. Create 3 separate, encrypted USB backups. 4. Create 3 physical, notarized hard copies of the dashboard data. 5. Prepare Edmund's video file. I looked at the list. It was a list of facts. It was a list of truth. Back in the penthouse, I knew. Marjorie was opening the envelope. She would be looking at the card. She would be reading the 5 words I had written. Lights on at 8:40. She would not understand. Not yet. It was not a threat. It was a schedule. My living room, all 600 square feet of it, ceased to be a home. It became a tactical operations center. I pushed my sofa against the far wall and aimed the high-lumen projector I'd rented at the largest blank space. The floor became a nest of cables, HDMI, power extenders, USB-C hubs. On my coffee table sat the core of the operation, 3 identical, encrypted solid-state drives, each sealed in its own anti-static bag and labeled with a specific alphanumeric code. For 48 hours, I did not leave. I worked. I took the raw data from the internal ledger and the visual assets from the public website. And I did what I do best. I built a user experience. I called it Transparency 360. It was not a slideshow. It was a dashboard, a living document. The first screen was simple 2 columns. On the left, the promise. It showed the glossy photos from Marjorie's new website, The Smiling Children, the artists' renderings of new community centers, the quotes about a new era on the right. The payment. It showed the ledger. I mapped every single dollar of the $28.7 million. I used flowcharts, just like I would for a client's e-commerce platform, showing the money leaving the fund's main account. The line, a thick red one, would travel to a box labeled LLC One Site Logistics. Then, a moment later, a new, thinner line would emerge from that box, labeled Consulting Fee, and travel directly to the Delaware Holding Company. I did this 14 times. The screen became a spider's web, with every single thread, every dollar, ending in the same small dark box in Wilmington. I cross-referenced the project images. The West Harlem Tech Hub completed. I pulled the satellite imagery for that address, time-stamped from that morning. It was a parking lot, a vacant, cracked, empty parking lot. I put the 2 photos side by side, the lie and the truth. I did this for every single Community Works project. I left no claim unchecked. I sourced every image, verified every address. There were no accusations, No inflammatory language, only data, only the facts, presented in a clean, legible, and utterly devastating interface. The opening slide was the only element that carried emotion. It was the video file from the USB Arthur had given me. It was Edmund, in his study, looking vital and strong. I isolated the one clip that mattered most. His eyes, clear and direct, looking into the lens. "A legacy is not what we own," his voice, firm and familiar, would say. "It is what we protect. It's time to redefine the meaning of our legacy." I stood in the center of my apartment, the projector light washing over me, and I practiced my own opening. I said it to the empty wall, over and over, until the words lost their fear and became simple tools. "I apologize for the interruption." My voice sounded too quiet. I said it again, from my diaphragm. "I apologize for the interruption, but the law does not keep business hours." It was short. It was a hammer. It would do. On the final day, Arthur came to my apartment. He did not look at the presentation's design. He looked at the evidence. He was there to verify the chain of custody. "This Excel file," he said, pointing to the original ledger on one of the encrypted drives. "Show me the hash." I ran the verification. A string of numbers and letters appeared. "Good," he said, checking an identical string on his own secure tablet. "The hash matches the file our internal source provided. It is untampered, the timestamp of its last modification. 2 days before our first meeting, 3 days before the bank freeze." Excellent. The metadata on the satellite images, sourced from a commercial provider, subscription under my studio's name, the receipts are here, the timestamps are embedded, legally acquired. And Edmund's video. It is a direct, bit-for-bit copy from the drive you gave me, which was a direct copy from the one executed in your office. "Good," he said, finally sitting back. He looked tired, but satisfied. "The foundation is stone. They cannot attack the evidence. They can only attack the presenter. And you are the legal trustee. You have every right to be there, and every right to present your audit." My encrypted phone buzzed. A message from Naomi. Her messages were always brief, stripped of all pleasantries, no accusations. "Do not use the word fraud. Do not use the word crime. You are not an investigator. You are the trustee, presenting your annual audit findings and asserting your legal authority. Let the data speak. We will do the rest." I typed back, "Understood." The news leak came that afternoon. Arthur's media contact sent him the link, a fawning, pre-gala interview with Marjorie in a high society chronicle. The headline was, "Marjorie Dean's Final Act of Grace." I read the article. In it, Marjorie announced her intention, live at the gala that night, to fold her entire personal fortune into the Northbridge Promise Fund. It was a move of staggering, preemptive genius. "It is an emotional shield," I said, pacing my apartment. "She is going to wrap herself in the flag of her own generosity. If I stand up, I will not be a trustee correcting the record. I will be the ungrateful stray attacking the saint who just gave away her fortune." Arthur nodded grimly. "It is a PR maneuver. I have seen this in case reports," I said, my mind racing, connecting patterns. The big, public, emotional gesture. It is designed to make the numbers look petty. It is a classic misdirection. She is hiding a $28 million cash flow problem behind a $100 million promise. It does not change the facts, Harper. "No," I said, "it does not, but it changes the room. I have to be ready for that." The final piece of the plan was the most delicate. The grand ballroom at the Lenox Imperial had a state-of-the-art audio-visual system. Marjorie's team would have their own presentation queued up, full of their smiling photos and false promises. "The technician," Arthur said, "is a gentleman named Carlos. He is a third-party contractor, not a hotel employee. He owes my firm a significant favor from a pro bono case we handled for his family 2 years ago. He will switch the feed." "He will not," Arthur said precisely. "That would be illegal. However, He is required to follow the instructions of the event's legal representative. He has been instructed to prepare a secondary input for a potential surprise video greeting. He will have your feed, input B, ready to go. When I give him the signal a simple adjustment of my glasses, like this, he will execute the switch. It will be seamless, a technical glitch that defaults to the correct feed. The plan was set. All the pieces were in place. With 6 hours to go, I turned off the projector. The room plunged back into shadow. I needed to prepare myself. I showered and stood in my closet. There was a temptation to wear armor, to wear something sharp, black, and severe. I resisted. I chose a dress of simple, dark green silk by Carolina Herrera. It was elegant, conservative, and quiet. It was the kind of dress they would approve of. It was camouflage. Then, I opened a small, worn velvet box. Inside was a simple silver brooch, shaped like a thistle. It was not a Dean heirloom. It was the only thing I owned from my biological grandmother, the woman whose face I could not remember. I pinned it to the dress, just over my heart. A quiet reminder of where I came from. I sat at my desk and set a timer on my phone. 90 minutes before I lay down. I took the white note card I had left at the penthouse. It had been returned to my apartment lobby, torn in half. I taped it together and put it on my desk. Lights on at 8:40. I looked at my presentation schedule. I had timed the entire speech, the video, the reveal of the dashboard, allowing for Marjorie's speech, the applause, and the technical glitch. My first slide. Edmund's face would appear at exactly 8:40 p.m. I picked up my own pen and wrote a new note, a note to myself, and stuck it to my monitor. Do not seek revenge with a knife. Seek it with a standard. My personal phone, the one Marjorie had the number for, had been vibrating on silent for 2 days. I looked at the lock screen. 99 missed calls. The voicemail box was full. I listened to one, out of curiosity. It was a lawyer I did not recognize, his voice smooth and urgent, promising me a life-changing sum of money if I would just come to the table and be reasonable. The next one was Savannah, a raw, screaming message that was just a string of insults. I did not listen to any more. I turned the phone off and slid it into a drawer. I lay down on my sofa and closed my eyes. I did not expect to sleep, but I did. I fell into a deep, dreamless void for exactly 90 minutes. When the alarm chimed, I woke up instantly. There was no grogginess. My eyes were clear. My mind was sharp, but my heart was hammering. A fast, steady beat against my ribs. It was time. The sun was coming up. Dawn was breaking over the flat rooftops of Queens, painting the sky in pale, cold colors of gray and orange. I walked to my kitchen and made a pot of black coffee. I stood by the window, watching the city wake up, the mug warming my hands. I took a sip. Lights on, I whispered to the rising sun. The grand ballroom of the Lenox Imperial was a cathedral of light. The ceiling, a cascading avalanche of crystal, refracted the light from a dozen chandeliers, scattering it like diamond dust over the 500 most powerful people in New York. A tower of champagne glasses, easily 20 feet tall, stood at the entrance, a fragile, glittering monument to the family's influence. The air hummed. It was the sound of 500 conversations, 5,000 whispers, all weaving together in a symphony of ambition and expensive perfume. This was Marjorie's kingdom, and at the center of it, on the raised dais, stood the Queen. Marjorie Hallworth Dean was at the podium, bathed in a spotlight so warm it looked like honey. She wore a vintage Valentino gown, a deep, arterial crimson. She was a figure of absolute, untouchable authority. Beside her, Savannah stood guard at a second microphone, her smile bright, wide, and utterly artificial. It was a smile engineered for cameras. She scanned the crowd, her gaze proprietary. I arrived at 8:35 p.m. I did not slip in through a service door. I did not try to hide. I walked, in my simple green silk dress, straight through the main entrance. The wall of sound and light hit me. I took one step onto the plush, burgundy carpet, and a man in a black suit with a discreet earpiece stepped directly into my path. His hand was raised, palm out. "Ma'am," he said, his voice politely impassive. "This is a private, ticketed event. I will need to see your name on the list." "Harper Thomas," I said. He tapped on his tablet, scrolled, tapped again. "I am very sorry," he said, his eyes meeting mine. "You are not on the list." He was a wall of polite muscle. "He is correct," a dry voice said. Arthur Pike appeared at my left shoulder. He carried his old leather briefcase. "Her name is not on the list." The security guard looked relieved, then confused. "She is the list," Arthur continued, his voice not loud, but sharp enough to slice through the nearest layer of chatter. "This is Harper Thomas, the legal, controlling trustee of the Northbridge Promise Fund. You will step aside." It happened like a current passing through water. The cluster of people nearest the door, who had been watching the exchange, fell silent. The silence spread, a circle widening in a pond. Heads began to turn, a row of bankers, then a table of politicians, then the arts patrons. In less than 5 seconds, the entire ballroom, all 500 guests, were swiveling, their faces pointing toward the entrance. The hum of 5,000 whispers collapsed into a vacuum of absolute, breathless silence. A waiter, frozen mid-stride, rattled a tray of glasses. I did not wait for the guard's permission. I began to walk. My heels sank into the thick carpet with each step, the silence stretching out. It was a terrible, long walk, down the center aisle, past the staring, frozen faces. I saw people I had known my whole life, people who had ignored me at family holidays. Their mouths were open, on the stage. Savannah's bright, practiced smile did not fade. It cracked. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. I watched her hand fly out and grip Marjorie's arm. Marjorie, annoyed, looked down at her daughter, and then looked up at me. Her face did not register confusion. It did not register shock. It hardened, instantly, into a mask of pure, condensed rage. I reached the low steps of the dais. I did not climb them. I stopped at the bottom, in the shadow of her podium, and looked up. "Marjorie," I said. My voice, my own, unamplified, was shocking in the quiet. "I apologize for the interruption." I let the words hang, just as I had practiced. "I require 90 seconds. I have a mandatory legal update regarding the fund that must be presented to its stakeholders." Savannah was the first to break. She lunged at her microphone, her hand shaking. "Security!" she shrieked, and her voice, amplified, cracked and echoed through the ballroom. "Security, get her out of here. Remove this woman immediately. She is trespassing." The guard from the door and 2 more who had been flanking the stage began to move. They converged on me, their faces set. "That will not be necessary." The voice came from my right. It was calm. It was female. Naomi Rusk stepped out from behind a massive, 6-foot-tall arrangement of white orchids. She wore her same, dull, gray suit. She looked like a sparrow in a flock of peacocks, and she was the most dangerous thing in the room. The guards stopped. They looked from Savannah, to me, to this woman. "Who in God's name are you?" Savannah hissed into the microphone. Naomi did not bother with the microphone. She did not raise her voice. She simply held up the small leather wallet containing her federal badge. "Department of Justice," she said, loud enough for the guards and the front tables to hear. "We are here to observe. Please, continue." The security men froze. They looked at the badge. They looked at Savannah, and they took 2 steps back. "A legal update." Marjorie's voice boomed from the podium. She had found her footing. She would play this as a performance. "An update from you." She laughed, a sound like glass breaking. "From the will," I said. I reached into my portfolio and pulled out the thick, vellum-bound document. I held it up. The final, executed will of Edmund Dean. Arthur Pike stepped forward, standing beside me as if we were in a courtroom. "If I may," he addressed the crowd, not Marjorie. He held up the single, laminated page. the addendum to the will, executed, notarized, and witnessed, the golden clause. He began to read. His voice was the dry, passionless instrument of the law, but the words echoed with the force of a cannon. If the primary named beneficiary, Harper Thomas, has attained the age of 30 years upon my passing. He read the entire clause. All subsequent amendments, codicils, or restructuring efforts shall be rendered null and void without the explicit, written, and notarized consent of said beneficiary. He lowered the paper and looked at the 500 silent faces. Miss Thomas is 33. Her consent was not obtained. The restructured charter you are all here to celebrate tonight, the one announced by Mrs. Dean, is legally non-existent. A visible physical shockwave passed through the room. I saw a city councilman, seated at a table near the front, physically drag his chair back, scraping it on the floor as he created distance. A prominent banker, a man who headed one of the fund's largest corporate patrons, stared at his wife in open, undisguised horror. Near the back, a congressman who had been schmoozing by the bar, quietly and quickly slipped out of his seat and disappeared toward the exit. Marjorie gripped the podium, her knuckles white. She laughed again. It was a high, terrible, brittle sound. "Ladies and gentlemen," she boomed, her voice dripping with a theatrical, false pity. "I truly apologize for this spectacle, this poor, disturbed girl." She spat the last word. "My granddaughter. She is clearly suffering from profound emotional distress following the funeral. She is confused. She is lashing out. It is a family matter, a deep, personal tragedy, and I beg you to forgive this outburst." I looked at her. I felt the silver thistle brooch through the silk of my dress. I felt the cold, steady purpose. "She is right," I said to the crowd. "It is a family matter." I walked past her, to the technician's lectern at the side of the stage. The tech, Carlos, looked pale, his eyes wide. I did not look at him. I looked across the stage, at Arthur, calmly. Arthur reached up and adjusted his glasses. I pulled the small, black USB drive from my pocket. "And since it is a family matter," I said, my voice rising, "I believe my grandfather should speak for himself." I plugged the drive into the secondary input slot. On the 30-foot wide screen above Marjorie's head, the shimmering Northbridge A New Era logo vanished. It was replaced by a second of blue static, and then it was Edmund. He was in his study, sitting in his leather chair. He was not the frail, dying man they remembered. He was strong. He was healthy. His eyes were sharp, and in the bottom right corner of the screen, a digital timestamp was burned in March 04. 1:15 p.m., 18 months ago. A collective, audible gasp rose from the ballroom. This was not a ghost. This was the patriarch. Marjorie froze. She turned, slowly, and looked up at the giant image of her husband. Her face, for the first time, was not angry. It was terrified. Edmund looked directly into the camera lens, as if he were making eye contact with every person in the room. His voice, strong and sure, filled the silent hall. "A legacy is not what we own," he said. "It is what we protect." "He was sick," Savannah whispered into the microphone, but her voice was drowned out, the words weak and desperate. He was confused. "I have concerns," the man on the screen continued, his voice resonating with authority. "A philanthropic entity must not become a vehicle for ego. For this reason, I have structured the fund to be protected by the one person I trust to uphold its integrity, the one person who has always seen the truth, my chosen grandchild, Harper Thomas." The whispers were gone. The room was not silent. It was holding its breath. The tide of power had not just turned, it had evaporated. "The fund needs transparency," Edmund's voice declared. "It's time." The video faded to black. I picked up the presentation clicker from the lectern. "My grandfather was right," I said. The fund needs transparency. So let's begin the audit. I clicked to the second slide. The Transparency 360 dashboard lit up the massive screen. The two columns, the promise and the payment, appeared, side by side, in stark, undeniable black and white. Naomi Rusk, still standing by the wall, spoke. Her voice quiet but carrying in the silence. Under state and federal law, she announced, the legal trustee has the full and unrestricted right to conduct an internal audit. I glanced at the enormous, ornate clock on the far wall of the ballroom. The heavy, gold-plated hands were perfectly aligned. It was 8:40 p.m. The lights were on. I did not speak. I let the dashboard speak. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. A heavy, suffocating blanket. 500 pairs of eyes were fixed on the 30-foot screen. I pressed the clicker. The screen refreshed. Item: the Community Works Initiative. I animated the flowchart I had built. On the left, the Northbridge Fund. In the center, a cloud of 14 discrete boxes. On the right, a single box labeled Wilmington Holding Corp. The Restructured Fund, I said, my voice amplified by the lectern microphone, has spent $28.7 million on community works in the last 6 weeks. I clicked again. A thick red line, labeled $1.2 million, moved from the fund's icon to a box labeled Site Logistics LLC. The room watched the money move. $1.2 million, I narrated, my voice cold and flat. Paid to Site Logistics for the West Harlem Tech Hub. I clicked again. A new, thinner line, labeled $900,000, snaked from the Site Logistics box and fed directly into the Wilmington Holding Corp. Box. A consulting fee of $900,000, paid by the vendor, back to a single, untraceable entity. I clicked again, faster. The screen lit up. The other 13 vendors, $2.5 million to Urban Renewal Group, $1.8 million back to Wilmington, $3 million to Educational Futures, $2.2 million back to Wilmington. The screen became a spider's web of red lines, all originating from the fund, all passing through the shell companies, and all terminating, every single one, in the same dark, anonymous box. $28.7 million, I stated, not $1 of which has been accounted for by a verifiable, independent contractor. The sound of someone dropping a champagne flute at the back of the room was like a gunshot. I clicked to the next slide. Let's look at the work itself, I said. Exhibit A, the West Harlem Tech Hub. Promised, the left side of the screen filled with the beautiful, glossy architectural rendering from Marjorie's new brochure. It showed a glass-fronted building, children using new computers, a bright, modern library. And, I clicked, Exhibit A, the West Harlem Tech Hub, delivered. The right side of the screen filled with my satellite photograph, the address from the invoice, the timestamp from the day before, the cracked, empty, weed-choked parking lot. A wave of low, horrified murmurs swept the room. Perhaps the educational equipment was delivered elsewhere, I suggested. I clicked to the next slide. Exhibit B, educational equipment purchase, a single invoice for $3.2 million. The invoice filled the screen, a 7-figure sum. And the delivery address, I zoomed in, an industrial warehouse in Queens. I clicked. The Google Street View image filled the screen. The boarded-up, derelict storefront, the for lease sign, dated 3 years prior, covered in graffiti. I clicked again. Exhibit C, vendor verification. The fund's ledger shows $7 million in payments to 3 independent contractors for community outreach. I put their company names on the screen. We contacted those contractors, I said. I clicked, and 3 notarized. Signed affidavits appeared, side by side. I read the first one aloud. I, David Chenot, of Chenot Masonry, do swear that I have never been contracted by, nor have I ever received any payment from, the Northbridge Promise Fund or any of its agents. I did not need to read the other 2. The room was reading them. They all said the same thing. The silence that followed was different. It was cold. It was hostile. It was the sound of 500 powerful people realizing they had been made fools of. This is a lie. The voice was Savannah's. It was high, shrill, and cracked with panic. She grabbed her microphone, her knuckles white. This is slander. She faked this. This is what she does. She makes drawings on the computer. She was appealing to the room, her eyes darting wildly. Those photos are doctored. The documents are forgeries. Anyone can fake a picture of a parking lot. It's absurd. Her voice echoed, desperate and ugly. Arthur Pike stepped forward. He was holding the large, sealed manila envelope. He walked calmly to the center of the dais. Mrs. Dean Harris alleges forgery, Arthur announced, his voice a calm counterpoint to Savannah's hysteria. He ripped open the seal on the envelope. This, he said, pulling out a thick, original contract, is the original wet ink contract for the West Harlem Tech Hub, sourced this morning, under court order, from the fund's own locked archives, to which Miss Thomas, as trustee, has the key. He held it up. And this, he said, holding up a single sheet of paper, is the SHA-256 hash value of that document, a cryptographic fingerprint, generated when it was first scanned into the system 2 years ago. He pointed to the corner of my projection, where a string of text had been waiting, unnoticed. That hash, Arthur said, is a perfect character-for-character match to the hash of the digital file you see on the screen. It is not a fake. It is not a forgery. It is the original document, the one your own office filed. Savannah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. A man in the third row stood up. He was James Arbuthnot, one of the oldest and most respected members of the board, a man who had served with Edmund for 30 years. A point of order, he said, his voice deep and steady, silencing the whispers. Marjorie, who had been frozen, turned to him. James, this is a point of order. Marjorie, he repeated, his voice firm. He was looking at Arthur. Mr. Pike, given the legal clarification from the will and the evidence presented by the legal trustee, it appears the fund is in a state of crisis. He paused, and his gaze swept the room. According to the original bylaws of the fund, Article 4, Section 2, in the event the acting CEO is compromised or unable to perform their duties, the board must vote to immediately confirm the legal successor to ensure continuity of the mission. The will is clear. The successor is Harper Thomas. He looked directly at me. I move, he said, his voice resonating in the silent hall, to confirm Harper Thomas as the active CEO and president of the Northbridge Promise Fund, effective immediately. Second, a woman from another table called out. All in favor? Arbuthnot said. A hand went up, then another, and another. A man at the front table, one of the city's largest bankers, raised his hand high. Within 10 seconds, the air was a forest of raised arms. It was not a vote. It was an uprising. I scanned the room. I saw the faces of the people who had laughed at me at the dinner table. Their hands were up. I looked at the head table, the one Marjorie and Savannah shared with the mayor. The mayor's hand was up. Only 2 chairs were still. Marjorie and Savannah sat motionless. 2 small, rigid islands in a sea of affirmation. The motion carries, Arbuthnot said. He sat down. It was done. I picked up my clicker. I walked from the technician's lectern to the main podium. I stood in the warm, honey-colored spotlight that had been Marjorie's. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the 500 faces, all of them now looking at me, not with pity or curiosity, but with expectation. Thank you, I said. My first act as CEO is to finish this audit. I took a breath. I apologize for the interruption. I paused and delivered the line I had practiced in the dark of my apartment. But the law doesn't keep business hours. A coup. Marjorie did not scream. She roared. She launched herself from her chair and grabbed Savannah's microphone, shoving her own daughter aside. Her face was a mask of crimson fury, her crimson dress shaking. "This is a hostile, illegal takeover," she yelled, her voice raw and vibrating with rage. "A coup built on lies by a nothing." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is destroying this family's legacy. This is what we get. This is the thanks we get for saving her from the gutter. She is poisoning you against us." I did not answer. I did not have to. I simply gestured to the screen, where the still image of Edmund's face, strong, clear, and decent, remained, watching her. His paper skin, his bright, knowing eyes. He was the legacy. She was the lie. Across the room, I saw Naomi Rusk. She was not looking at Marjorie. She was looking at the hotel's technical staff and the plainclothes security near the exits. She gave a small, sharp nod. The warrants, the agents waiting in the lobby, they were ready. I turned back to the audience and pressed the clicker one last time. The screen changed. The evidence disappeared. It was replaced by my final slide. It was not an accusation. It was a plan. The Transparency 360 Roadmap. It was a wireframe for a new website, a new system, a public-facing database, real-time tracking of every dollar, from every donor to every project, available to every recipient, every journalist, and every person in this room. "This," I announced, "is the new era. It begins tonight." For 20 seconds, the ballroom was absolutely silent. The only sound was Marjorie's ragged, amplified breathing. Then, a new sound. Click, flash. The press photographers, who had been frozen in shock at the back of the room, suddenly realized what they were witnessing. The dam broke. The flashes were blinding, a strobe light capturing Marjorie's face, contorted in rage, and my own, calm and steady in the spotlight. Click, click, flash. And then, a new voice. It came from the front table. Mr. Hargrove, of the Hargrove Foundation, one of their largest and oldest institutional donors. He was elderly and distinguished, and he stood up slowly. He did not shout. He spoke in the quiet, carrying voice of old money, a voice that cut through all the noise. "Finally," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, his voice filled with a profound, weary relief. "Finally, someone is telling the truth." Mr. Hargrove's words, "Finally, someone is telling the truth," hung in the air, severing the last thread of Marjorie's power. The chaos that followed was not a riot. It was a realignment, swift and surgical. The flashes from the press corps at the back of the room became a blinding, continuous strobe, capturing the scene Marjorie, frozen by the podium, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. Savannah, clutching her mother's arm, her eyes wide and vacant with shock, and me, standing in the spotlight, holding the clicker. Naomi Rusk, who had been a silent observer, now moved. She did not rush the stage. She simply walked to the front, flanked by two men in dark suits whom I had not previously noticed. They were not hotel security. They moved with a different, more deliberate weight. Naomi stepped up to the dais, her sensible gray suit a stark contrast to the Valentino crimson. She did not address me. She spoke directly, and quietly, to Marjorie. The microphone picked up her voice, amplifying the calm, procedural takedown. "Mrs. Dean," Naomi said, her voice devoid of emotion, "we are federal investigators. We are here tonight to verify and secure all documents related to the Northbridge Promise Fund. We have a warrant for all financial records, servers, and personal devices related to the fund's operation." She paused, letting the words sink in. Not just for Marjorie, but for the entire room. "We prefer to do this quietly. We will not be putting anyone in handcuffs here tonight, unless you or your staff necessitate it." It was a professional courtesy that was also a profound threat. Marjorie, galvanized by this final, public humiliation, found her voice. "This is my event," she hissed, her voice a low growl. "You cannot, I will not be." She made a move to leave the stage, to push past Naomi, to salvage some scrap of dignity by fleeing. It was a fatal miscalculation. It was not Naomi's men who stopped her. It was the hotel security. The same men who had been under her command an hour ago, 2 guards, their faces neutral, stepped forward at the base of the dais, blocking her path to the aisle. "Ma'am," the head of security said, his voice flat, "we've been advised by the Justice Department representative to secure the exits. For the integrity of the investigation, please remain in the ballroom." The cameras exploded. The image was devastating. Marjorie Hallworth Dean, the Queen of New York, trapped on her own stage, held prisoner not by feds, but by the catering staff. The doors were open, but she was not allowed to leave. The cameras continued to flash. That was when Savannah broke. She saw the end, the real end, not the loss of the money, but the loss of the image. She stumbled off the dais and rushed toward me, her hands outstretched, her face a desperate, tear-streaked plea. "Harper, please," she sobbed, grabbing my arm. The silk of my dress bunched in her fist. "Please, stop this. We are family. You cannot do this to us. It's family." The word hit me. Family. I thought of the dining room table. I thought of the shadow of the chandelier. I thought of Stray and kitchen help and little drawings. I looked at her hand on my arm, this desperate, manicured claw. I did not pull away. I just looked at it until she, feeling the coldness of my stillness, slowly let her hand drop. "Family," I said, my voice quiet, but the microphone was still live, and the word carried through the silent room. "Is a responsibility, Savannah. It is not a slogan you get to use when you are losing." She stared at me, her mouth open, the realization hitting her that the emotional well was dry. There was nothing left for her to leverage. The press surged forward, a wall of microphones and cameras, shouting questions. "Miss Thomas, when did you uncover this? Is the district attorney involved? Marjorie, is it true? What will happen to the fund?" I held up a hand. The room, remarkably, quieted. The board was watching. The donors were watching. "I will read a brief statement," I announced. I pulled a single card from my portfolio. It was not an attack. It was a containment strategy. "Tonight," I read, "in my capacity as the legal trustee of the Northbridge Promise Fund, I presented my findings from an internal audit. This audit revealed significant financial irregularities and a clear deviation from the fund's chartered mission. My grandfather, Edmund Dean, established this fund to serve the community, not the egos of its administrators. Effective immediately, I am assuming full operational control to ensure the fund's integrity. We will be implementing a new Transparency 360 policy, making all expenditures public. We will cooperate fully with all federal and state investigators. The work of the Northbridge Promise Fund is vital, and it will continue." I did not use the word fraud. I did not use the word theft. I did not use the word crime. I did not have to. The dashboard, still glowing on the screen behind me, said it all. That is all I will say tonight. A final point of order. James Arbuthnot, the elderly board member, stood up again, his voice cutting through the press noise. "Mr. Pike, for the legal minutes, the previous vote was an emergency confirmation. I now move for a formal, recorded vote to ratify the emergency election of Harper Thomas as CEO and President, and to formally suspend all signatory, operational, and board privileges of Marjorie Dean and Savannah Dean Harris, pending the results of a full, independent, and federally supervised audit." "Second," came the same voice from across the room. "All in favor," Arbuthnot called out. The response was overwhelming. It was a sea of hands. "The motion is carried," Arbuthnot said, his voice grim. "Let the minutes reflect. The vote is unanimous." He sat down, a look of profound, weary sadness on his face. He had just dismantled the legacy of his oldest friends, as if summoned by the vote. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was not a text. It was a push notification from the custodial bank's executive services app. the one Arthur had given me access to. Alert account privileges updated. All accounts ending 4402 and 5510 are now subject to mandatory dual signature authorization H. Thomas, A. Pike. All pending automated transfers have been suspended. All previous standing payment orders are now void. The vault was closed. The system had accepted the new reality. The money was safe. Miss Thomas? I looked up. Mr. Hargrove, the man whose words had started the avalanche, was standing in front of me. He looked at me with sharp, appraising eyes. That, he said, nodding to my final slide, the Transparency 360 plan, is not just a good idea, it is the only idea. He put his hand out. I shook it. His grip was firm. My foundation, he announced, his voice loud enough for the press to hear, was prepared to pull our funding tonight. We are now prepared to do the opposite. You get that transparency system operational within 90 days. I want to see every dollar move. Young lady and my foundation will commit $12 million to the new Community Works program, the real one. Before I could even respond, two other people, a man and a woman, stepped up. They were partners from two of the largest, most fearsome accounting firms in the city. Miss Thomas, the woman said, handing me her card, what you are undertaking is a forensic nightmare. My firm would like to offer our services, pro bono, for the first quarter, to help you conduct the full audit and establish the new controls. We believe in this. The cascade had begun. I turned back to the podium one last time, looking over the shell-shocked crowd. I saw Marjorie and Savannah, now seated, flanked by plainclothes agents, silent and small in their crimson and designer gowns. One final announcement, I said, my voice clear and strong. As of tonight, the bylaws of the Northbridge Promise Fund are amended, effective immediately. There will be no more automatic, hereditary, or guaranteed appointments to the board of directors. All future seats will be filled based on proven expertise in finance, community development, and nonprofit governance. The era of the family dynasty is over. The era of standards has begun. The room was quiet. I nodded to the board, to Mr. Hargrove. Then, I turned and walked off the stage. The hotel's PR manager, a young woman in a headset, her face pale and damp with sweat, intercepted me near the exit. Miss Thomas? She stammered. On behalf of the Lenox Imperial, we deeply apologize for the technical difficulties, the sound, the AV issues. I looked at her. The sound, I said, was perfectly clear. Thank you. I walked past the swarming press. I did not take their questions. I just kept walking. I pushed through the heavy glass doors of the ballroom, out of the heat and the noise and the blinding flashes, and into the cool, quiet marble lobby. I did not wait for the elevator. I took the escalators down. I walked out the main doors of the hotel and onto the sidewalk. The cold, sharp, December air hit my face and filled my lungs. It was biting, but it was clean. The city noise, the sound of sirens and traffic, was a relief. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel happy. I felt empty. I felt the profound, bone-deep exhaustion of a battle completed. I looked at the crowd inside, the flashes still going off. A silent, frantic lightning storm. I did not need the applause. I did not need their validation. Miss Thomas, Arthur Pike was at my elbow. He was holding my coat. I had not even realized I had left it. I slid my arms into it, the warmth a small, distant comfort. He stood beside me, looking not at me, but at the hotel entrance. You set a new standard tonight. Harper, he said quietly, his voice full of a gravelly respect. A noisy victory is easy. Anyone can burn a house down, a quiet restoration, building a new foundation while the old one is still crumbling. That is difficult, and that is more valuable. The doors hissed open again. Naomi Rusk emerged, zipping up her practical gray jacket. She walked over to us. All business. They are cooperating with the document seizure, she reported. My team will be at the fund offices all night. They will be at the Dean residence by 6 a.m. We have the warrants for everything. She looked at me, her patient, appraising eyes meeting mine. That, she said, nodding back at the ballroom, was the fast part, the explosion. Now comes the slow work, the digging, the audits, the depositions. It will take months. It will be boring. It will be a grind. She held out her hand. I shook it. I'm good at that part, I said. She nodded once, a brief, shared understanding. I know. She turned and disappeared into the night. Arthur hailed a cab. I got in and left them all behind. The gala was the explosion. The days that followed were the slow, methodical work of clearing the rubble and checking the foundations. The world, Marjorie's world, expected another party, a coronation, a victory lap. I gave them an audit. We did not move into the fund's opulent headquarters, not at first. I, along with the 2 pro bono audit firms and Arthur, set up a temporary operations center in a sterile, rented conference room in a building downtown. The first order of business was not celebration. It was restructuring. The Northbridge Promise Fund's board was a collection of Marjorie's oldest friends, Savannah's social rivals, and men who owed the Dean family favors. They were a rubber stamp for a dynasty. I dissolved the board. In its place, we instituted a new selection process. I wrote the protocol myself, based on the blind review systems used in academic journals. We put out a public call for applications for 5 new board seats. My assistant, the only person I hired in the first week, received the applications and redacted all identifying information. No names, no addresses, no university affiliations. We reviewed the applications based on one metric: expertise. We selected a forensic accountant who had spent 20 years in the Bronx DA's office. We selected a community organizer from Brooklyn who had built 2 youth centers from scratch. We selected a logistics expert from Queens who specialized in supply chain transparency. We selected a data scientist and a constitutional lawyer. When the new board met for the first time, it was not over crystal glasses of champagne. It was over lukewarm coffee and paper cups. They did not know each other. They owed each other nothing. They were perfect. My second act was to make the Transparency 360 system more than a slide on a projector. It became the fund's new operating system. We did not hire an outside agency. My own studio, Thomas Company, took the contract. It was the first contract I signed as CEO, and I signed it to myself. As the owner of my company, I recused myself from the vote, and the new board, citing the urgent need, approved it unanimously. The new Northbridge website went live 60 days later. It was not beautiful. It was brutally efficient. The homepage was a simple, real-time dashboard, where every dollar goes. We built an open API, inviting the public to track our expenditures. Every contract we signed was digitized and made publicly viewable. Every contractor was required to submit weekly, time-stamped, geotagged photographs of their progress. There would be no more photographs of parking lots. With the system in place, we began the real work. I met with the city councils of 3 boroughs. We signed new memorandums of understanding, not with vague promises, but with concrete deliverables. We launched a new scholarship program for trade schools and technology degrees. We broke ground on 3 new community centers, the ones that had been projects in Marjorie's ledger, and we funded 3 new job placement centers, targeting the exact neighborhoods her shell companies had claimed to serve. The fund's headquarters had been a monument to ego. The CEO's office was a massive glass-walled corner suite with a 30-foot view of the skyline. I gave that office to the grant writing team and the financial auditors. I moved my own office into a small, functional room at the back of the building, one whose window looked directly out over a public playground. I wanted to hear the sound of children playing. It was a good reminder of what was at stake. The Dean penthouse, the stage for my final humiliation, was next. Arthur's forensic accountants discovered what I had long suspected: it had been purchased a decade ago with fund money, classified as an executive residence and event space. It was an asset. I gave the order. We liquidated the contents: the antique silver, the crystal, the French furniture, the art. It was all sold at auction. The proceeds, a rather staggering sum, went directly back into the fund's general account. We kept the space itself. We had the dark, heavy wallpaper stripped. We had the floors bleached. We painted every wall a simple, clean white. It is now the Edmund Dean Digital Skills Center. The massive dining room, where I was told I was born to serve the kitchen, is now a state-of-the-art computer lab, offering free classes in coding, user experience design, and financial literacy to any young person who walks in the door. I changed the payment policies. The fund, under Marjorie, had operated on a charity discount model, bullying small, local vendors into providing services for 30 or 40% below market rate. Leveraging the prestige of working with the deans, I abolished that. The new policy was simple. We pay fair market value, and we pay all invoices within 30 days. We would not build our philanthropy on the exploitation of small businesses. The first quarterly audit from the independent firms came back. The numbers were stark. By simply eliminating the 14 shell companies, the inflated contracts, and the consulting kickbacks, we had saved $4.2 million. That money was immediately reallocated to the scholarship fund. At the end of the first year, I presented my first impact report to the new board and the press. We did not count success in lives touched, a metric I had always despised for its vagueness. We counted in facts. 11,300 individuals had either completed a training program, received a full scholarship, or been placed in a full-time job. We were no longer a society checkbook. We were an engine. My own life did not inflate to match my new title. I remained in my 600-square-foot apartment. The CEO salary was significant, and I used the first year of it to pay off the last of my student loans and my studio's startup debt. The only thing I upgraded was my desk chair. I commissioned a local woodworker in Red Hook, one of our new partners, to build me a simple, solid walnut chair with good lumbar support. It is the most expensive thing I own, and it is real. The old world did not disappear entirely. It tried to find new ways in. I received an email from a distant dean cousin, the one who had raised his glass to clarity. He wrote that he was appalled by what Marjorie had done, and that he always knew I had potential. He suggested it was time to heal the family rifts and offered me an honorary, unpaid advisory seat on his new venture capital fund. I replied politely, "Thank you for the offer. Unfortunately, my standards are fully allocated at this time." I went back to the penthouse only once before the renovations began, to retrieve one item, Edmund's old heavy wooden chessboard. It sits on the bookshelf in my small apartment now. I look at it often. I finally understood his last move. He was a master strategist. He had not chosen an heir based on blood or affection. He had chosen a successor based on a standard. Marjorie, under federal investigation and facing a raft of civil suits, began to write me letters. They were long, rambling, 10-page justifications, handwritten on her thick, cream-colored stationery and sent via her lawyers. They were not apologies. They were accusations, full of phrases like, "You must have misunderstood," and "My intentions were always pure." I read every one. And I made a new rule for myself. For every letter I receive from her, I make a $5,000 personal donation to a nonprofit that provides job training and interview suits for women re-entering the workforce. It feels like the correct and final transaction. I have learned, in the past year, how to speak in front of 500 people without my hands shaking. I have learned how to run a boardroom, how to read a balance sheet, and how to say no, cleanly and without apology. But I still draft my most important ideas, my structural charts, my plans, my speeches on a yellow legal pad with a number 2 pencil. I like the faint, sharp smell of the wood shavings. It reminds me of the work. The city changes, but not in the way Marjorie promised, not with galas and press releases. It changes slowly. It changes with the sound of a real invoice being paid on time. It changes with the smell of fresh paint on a real classroom wall. It changes with the quiet, steady click of keyboards in the old penthouse, where new skills are being built, one line of code at a time. The final hearing was not in a grand criminal court. It was in the sterile, high-ceilinged room of the probate court, a place designed for the quiet, technical dissection of legacies. The room was packed, not with press, but with lawyers, the new board, and the quiet, heavy presence of Mr. Hargrove. Marjorie and Savannah were there, at a table across the aisle. They looked smaller, diminished, stripped of their crimson gowns and spotlights, reduced to simple, pale defendants in expensive, somber suits. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and no patience for performance, looked down at the sheaf of papers. She had been reviewing the case for weeks. "I have reviewed the will of Edmund Dean, the addendum known as the Golden Clause, and the subsequent filings by Mrs. Marjorie Dean," she announced, her voice flat, carrying in the silence. "The law," she continued, "is exceptionally clear on this point. The activation clause is valid. Miss Harper Thomas had attained the age of 30 upon Mr. Dean's passing. Therefore, all restructuring efforts, amendments, and board appointments made following Mr. Dean's death, without the explicit, written, and notarized consent of Miss Thomas, are void. They are null. They legally never happened." A single quiet exhale came from Arthur Pike's side of the table. He sat perfectly still, a statue of vindication. "Before I issue the final ruling," the judge said, looking at Marjorie, "Mrs. Dean, do you wish to make a statement?" This was her last stage. Marjorie stood, grasping the edge of the table. Her voice, stripped of its command, was thin, reedy. But she played her final card emotion. "Your Honor," she said, her voice trembling just enough, "I have dedicated my entire life to this family, to its legacy." She placed a hand on her chest. "Everything I did. Everything. It was only to protect the fund. I only wanted what was best for the legacy." The judge listened, impassive. "Mr. Pike," a response. Arthur stood. He did not look at Marjorie. He addressed the bench. "Your Honor, Mrs. Dean speaks of protecting the legacy. We would like to submit 2 final documents that define that protection." He placed 2 items before the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. "The first," Arthur said, his voice dry as dust, "is a finalized forensic trace of the consulting receipts. It shows the $28.7 million looping from the fund through the 14 shell companies and arriving, minus fees, in a private trust account in Delaware, an account controlled by Mrs. Dean herself." A sharp, involuntary gasp came from Savannah. She stared at her mother. "The second," Arthur continued, "is an internal email, sourced under federal warrant, sent from Mrs. Dean's personal email address to her personal accountant. It is dated 3 days after Edmund's death. The subject line is New Structure." Arthur held his copy. "I read the key line, 'We must move the liquid assets before the old will is fully processed. Use the community works budget as the vehicle. We will reclassify it as an expense later.'" He placed the paper down. "The legal fingerprints are quite clear. Your Honor, this was not protection. It was a heist." The judge read the email. She read it twice. Her face hardened. She looked up, not at Arthur, but at Marjorie. Then she picked up the gavel. "This court finds in favor of the petitioner, Harper Thomas," she declared. Crack. The sound of the gavel was sharp, final. "The Northbridge Promise Fund, and all its assets, are confirmed to be under the sole legal operational authority of CEO Harper Thomas. All restructured charters are voided. This court further orders that a full audit and repayment schedule be established to reclaim all misspent, misappropriated, or misdirected funds from Mrs. Marjorie Dean and Mrs. Savannah Dean Harris, effective immediately." Crack. It was over. Marjorie sank into her chair, a puppet with its strings cut. Savannah was crying silently, her face in her hands. I did not look at them. I looked at the tall, arched windows of the old courthouse, A bright, sharp beam of sunlight cut through the dusty air. In that column of light, thousands of tiny dust motes danced and swirled, catching the sun. It was like silent, golden confetti, falling just for us. We walked out of the courtroom into the marble sallyport. The press was there, a small, contained group. But I did not look at them. Standing by the marble pillars, waiting patiently, were Mr. Hargrove and the two other institutional donors who had committed on the night of the gala. They were not there to congratulate me. They were there to work. "Miss Thomas?" Hargrove said, holding a pen. He was smiling. "The new board. We are ready to sign the commitment for Year 2 of the Transparency 360 initiative." Arthur opened his briefcase. They began to sign the papers. Right there on the courthouse steps, I stepped past them, into the open air. I did not want to be in the photos. I did not smile. I did not pose. I just stood on the top step and took a deep, shuddering breath. The city air was cold and smelled of exhaust. It was real. "Harper." I turned. It was Savannah. She was alone. No lawyers. No mother. No PR team. Her makeup was ruined. Her expensive coat was unbuttoned. She looked hollow. She stopped a few feet away from me. They're taking everything," she whispered. Her voice was raw. "The bank accounts, the townhouse, everything." I said nothing. I just waited. She looked down at her hands, then up at me. Her eyes filled with a terrifying, vacant confusion. "What do you want from me?" "Harper," she asked, the voice a bare whisper. What do you want me to do?" It was the first real question she had ever asked me. I thought about all the things I could say. I thought about the dining room, the crystal glass, the kitchen help. I thought about the $28.7 million. I thought about the lies and the laughter. I reached into my briefcase. I pulled out a single, folded sheet of paper. It was not a legal document. It was not a check. "This," I said, "is a list of the top-ranked non-profit management courses in the state, certificate programs. They teach ethics, governance, and transparent accounting." She stared at the paper as if it were a snake. "You asked what I want," I said. "I want nothing from you. But if you genuinely want redemption, if you ever want to actually honor your father's name, stop plotting. Go learn something real. Start there." She looked at the paper. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a dazed, lost incomprehension. She was a woman who had only ever understood transactions, and this was a language she did not speak. She took the paper from my hand, her fingers brushing mine. I did not wait for her to speak. I turned and walked away. Arthur was right. Sometimes kindness, the real, hard, structural kind, is a much heavier sentence than a prison term. As I reached the bottom of the steps, my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out, assuming it was Arthur, signaling he was ready. It was not. It was a banking alert, a high-value wire transfer notification for the Northbridge Promise Fund, amount $50 million. I stopped, frozen on the sidewalk. $50 million. Origin Anonymous Donor Trust, Geneva. My fingers were cold. I scrolled down. There was a single line in the memo field. "Note for what we failed to protect." I stared at the words. We? It was from the other families. The Arbuthnotts. The Hargroves. The dozens of others who had sat by, silent, for years while Marjorie ran her kingdom. It was not charity. It was an apology. It was an atonement. Paid in 8 figures. I put the phone away. There would be no press release. There would be no public thank you. The name of the donor would never be put on a wall. It did not need to be. The work would be the thanks. That evening, I did not go to my apartment. I went to the new Digital Skills Center, the old penthouse. The classrooms were dark, the computer monitors sleeping, the white walls clean. I took the service stairs to the roof. The wind was cold up here, high above the city. It whipped my hair across my face. I walked to the edge. The city was spread out below me, a vast, glittering map of lights. It was not the kingdom Marjorie saw. I saw the map of our new network. I saw the community center in Harlem, the trade school in the Bronx, the new clinic in Queens. I saw the flow of transparent money, moving like clean, bright water through the streets. I stood there, in the wind, and I remembered that night. The crystal glass, the sound of her voice. They told me I would never match the family's status. They told me I was not good enough to sit at their table. I closed my eyes. The wind felt clean. I smiled, a real smile. Just for myself and the cold air. They were right. I built a different table. One they will never, ever be able to touch. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know your thoughts. So please comment below and tell me where you are listening from. Let's connect. And if you enjoyed this, please subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories, like this video, and give us an extra boost by hitting that hype button so more people can hear this story.